Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 40 for the 28th of Teves in a leap year. And we are continuing with chapter 14. And I'd like to start off today's podcast with a little anecdote about my handstand practice, believe it or not. So those of you who know me know that I have a very steady handstand contortion and yoga practice, something that I do every single day for 2 hours per day. I know that sounds crazy, with the exception of Shabbos and a few other days, but it's something I really love. It's something that I really find a lot of benefit to me and mentally as well. And I often find a lot of parallels between my practice on the mat to my practice off the mat and to my spiritual service of God and my daily living. So one day I was talking to a friend and she was curious about my handstand practice. And that's, something I'm always up for talking about. It's something I'm really passionate about. And she asked me about my practice. Like, what do I do already? When you think of a handstand, it's one thing. How much could you practice that already? And so I explained to her, that actually there's a lot of different ways of getting into a handstand, different ways of holding a handstand. Like there's a lot that goes into it, And then she said, okay, well, what's something that you're not able to do right now that you would really like to do? And so I immediately knew the answer. The answer to that is something which is called a handstand press or a press handstand, which means that rather than jumping up into a handstand, you actually lift up very slowly from the ground. There's different ways of getting into a press handstand with your feet together, feet apart, whatever. It's a whole thing. But the main idea is that you're pressing slowly from the ground and you lift up slowly instead of jumping up into your handstand. And she said to me, oh, wow, that does sound very impressive. How long do you think it's going to take you to get there? And I paused for a moment and I said, you know what? I really don't know. And she said, wow, so you don't know how long it's going to take you. How long have you been working on it? And I said, I've been working on it for years. And it really got me thinking. And it got me thinking about my practice in general and about how I really do believe that eventually, someday, hopefully, I will get my press handstand. I don't actually know. I can't predict the future. I don't know what the future has to hold. All I can do is practice on a daily basis and work and work and work and then just hope for the best. But what the result of my practice will be, that's not in my hands at all, And this, I think, is a very, very profound lesson for many things in life. Most specifically in regards to bitachon, this comes up a lot when we talk about trusting in God, that we do not have control over our over what happens in the world, over the results of our actions. All we have control over is our intentions and the choices that we make between good and bad. And so this is the topic of today. This is very much related to what we're going to be talking about today. So if you recall, way back in the very first chapter, right at the beginning, we brought up this idea that comes from the Gemara in Masechet Nida, that before a person is born, they are given an oath in which they are to say that they are to be a tzaddik. And not only should they be a tzaddik, but they should not be a rasha. They should not be a wicked person. And then it got really weird when we said, however, your whole life, you should see yourself as if you were a wicked person. So we already talked about this quite a bit. And we talked about, the idea of like, why should we see ourselves as a wicked person? And then we said, it's not that you should see yourself as if like you're literally a wicked person, but you should always be aware of the fact that you could be a wicked person and to actively work against this. We talked about that a few episodes ago. And we also talked about in yesterday's episode and a few episodes before that about this idea that being a tzaddik is not something that's attainable to everybody. What every individual has is the ability to become a Beinoni, which is somebody who has full control over their thought, their speech, and their action. But something that is not within the realm of control of the average person is to have control over their natural impulses, over their natural cravings and their heart, which is within the realm of a tzaddik. So what we're going to be focusing on today is this idea of going back to that initial oath. We make an oath to be a tzaddik, but then we have the question, we already said that not everybody can be a tzaddik. So it seems like it's an oath in vain. It seems like, we're promising to be something that we don't even know if we're necessarily have the ability to be that or not. And then not only that, if we say that what we make an oath over is to be a tzaddik, why do we then have to say, do not be a rasha? If we say, okay, yes, I'm making an oath, I'm going to be a tzaddik, somebody who's a tzaddik by definition is not a rasha. So why do we have to do both? So this is where the Alter Rebbe begins today's portion, is asking this exact question. He says that here we're going to understand this duplicate language of the oath, where it says that you should be a tzaddik and you should not be a rasha, because seemingly this is very mysterious. Because when a person makes an oath to be a tzaddik, why do they then have to go on and make another oath not to be a rasha? And the Alter Rebbe says that the reason for this is because, as we mentioned, not everybody merits to be a tzaddik. And it's not in the realm of a person's choice to really achieve this level and attain this level to really derive true pleasure in God. And that they will totally hate evil, which is the definition of what a tzaddik is. And this is why, says the Alter Rebbe, the person is given the second part of the oath, which is not to be a rasha. Because not being a rasha, this is something that is within the realm of choice, is within our bechira, our ability to choose. And what this means is that we all do have, as we've been talking about, the ability to control our taivas, to control our desires, not to control ourselves so that we don't have the desires, but we have the ability to stop these desires from taking over and conquering our body. So what this means, as we've discussed previously, is that we all have the ability to stop any negative impulses that we might have from overtaking ourselves and causing us to either do something which is negative, so we can hold ourselves back from negative behavior, which is like sur mera in Hebrew, and also to make sure that we're not neglectful in doing positive activity. So that's in the realm of aseh tov, to do good. So now the Alter Rebbe says that even though it is not within every person's ability to achieve this level of tzaddik, to achieve this level of really truly deriving true pleasure in God and hating anything that's against God, nevertheless, we still have this obligation to set aside specific times to try to figure out ways to come to this level of really hating anything. So the Alter Rebbe gives an example that's brought up in the Gemara in Shabbos, Masechet Shabbos 152a, where it talks about, for a man, if a man is feeling very lustful towards women, for example, which is not something that is condoned by Torah. Men aren't really supposed to indulge in fantasies about women and stuff like that. So the Gemara gives some really practical advice how to try to overcome this. And it says that a man should think of a woman and really think about her in this very raw way and realize that all she is really is a vessel full of filth. Like a woman is full of just bodily liquids and fluids and excrement and stuff like that. That might sound really gross, but it's sort of like is a good kind of trick for somebody to go away from this feeling of lustfulness towards a woman in a way that's not healthy, and to realize that she's just this like object of all these bodily functions. And the Alter Rebbe says that you can actually apply this logic to pretty much anything, any pleasure of this world. So there's a saying that says that hachacham ro'eh et hanolad, which means that a wise man sees that which is born, like sees into the future, which basically literally means that a wise person is somebody who thinks ahead. They're not just living in the moment. And so the Ultra Herbalist says that if you think about all of the pleasures of this world, all of them really turn into just like waste. So if you think about, let's say if you see like a really good chocolate cake or candy or something like that, and it looks really good in the moment, once you eat it, this might sound really gross, but it's actually what happens. It really just becomes digested in your body and it turns into waste and you end up excreting most of it. So when we start thinking about these things that we really desire and we have these strong cravings for, when we really break it down and we really think about it in a more like logical and rational way, we can maybe start to train ourselves to see things in not the most appealing way. One way that I could personally relate to this, I think, is that slowly over the years, I've started to accustom myself to not eat gluten and try to stay away from processed foods as much as possible, or especially refined sugar, to the point that now when I will see a cookie or a piece of cake, something that's like store bought or something like that, it doesn't even tempt me anymore because I've become so sensitive to the negative feeling that I get from that cookie or that cake and the lethargy I'm going to feel, and that I'm going to just feel really scattered and all over the place. And I'm not being preachy here. Everybody, can eat whatever they want. And I think food affect people in different way, but I just know for myself, when I eat cookies or cakes or things like that, it has a very negative effect on me, and it will cause me to be really scattered brained, really lethargic, really out of it, really in a bad mood. And I've gotten to the point where I've become so sensitive to this that now when I see a cookie, no longer do I see this like, yummy thing. I mean, maybe I'll see that for like a split second, but what overtakes that feeling is the feeling of grossness that I know that I'm going to feel in the next moment. So this feeling, this is like a very small example that I think the Ultra Rebbe is trying to get us to get to here is, going over and above just the set, getting not only in a healthy sense of like just, cookies and cakes aren't the healthiest thing for you, but really any kind of physical indulgence. It's not only about physical health, but it's actually about spiritual health, and realizing that that indulging in any kind of physicality for the sake of physicality itself really is a detraction from God and doesn't really have substance to it in the way that it might look like on the outside. And then on the flip side of that, so that's sort of focusing on, the negative side of how to train yourself to really hate things that are against God, namely these like physical indulgences. And then the Ultra Rebbe says that you can also do this in the positive way to figure out a way to develop and train yourself to have this pleasure and joy in God. How do you do this? Is by really meditating upon the greatness of God as much as you can. And even if a person might know that they'll never really get there, a person knows like sort of something that, the Tanya sort of starts off with is this idea of, or the overarching theme of the Tanya is this idea that you will not be a tzaddik. You will never get there. But nevertheless, just because you know that you most likely will never get to this level of being a tzaddik, this doesn't exempt you from the oath of trying to get there. So going back to my analogy about the handstand, if you remember that, and this is something that I can relate to, again, in my physical practice of handstands and other types of physical things that I do, that even if I know that I'm never going to get to that level of getting my press handstand, even though I would like to think that I would like to get there, I know that in the process of me working towards it, I've developed so many other skills, both mentally, physically, and emotionally, and I've become so much stronger as a result that even though I haven't gotten that like ta-da final pose, there still has been so much benefit along the way. And so I think this is what the Ultra Rebbe is really saying here, that it's, even though it would be great if we really could get to that level of actually being a tzaddik, he's saying that there's value in the striving itself, and that the striving is actually what the oath is saying. The oath isn't saying that you need to get there and become a tzaddik, because whether a person is going to be a tzaddik or not is something that's really just, up to God. But every person has the requirement to try to get there. And not only that, the Ultra Rebbe says, but he says that through practice, this ability, when a person continuously tries to control themselves and control themselves and control themselves, it becomes second nature. And again, I can relate this again to my physical practice, that when you really practice something over and over and over again, it does become easier over time. And it's like that pretty much with anything, any kind of a habit if you've ever tried doing different habits, the more you habituate yourself to a certain activity, it does eventually become second nature. And so in this case, if a person really accustoms themselves to hating something that's evil, even if it just kind of seems like kind of fake on the surface, and you're just doing this exercise to try to tell yourself like, okay, this food or this woman is just like this physical object that's just going to decay and, is just made up of different cells and whatever, even if you don't really feel that viscerally, but you train yourself to think that way, the more you do this, first of all, the easier it will be to get into this state of thinking like this. And secondly, it actually will have a real effect on you where you will start to hate this thing in a real way on some small level. And similarly, if a person continuously develops this habit of rejoicing in God through this meditation upon the greatness of God, even if it doesn't feel authentic at the time, that through this this meditation, through this exercise that the person engages in, it will cause some kind of effect. So there's a term in Chassidus that's brought up here. It's the Aramaic term, which is esarusa de la tata, esarusa de la ela. So through an arousal from below, this causes an arousal from above. So everything that we do down here causes an effect above. So meaning that like through a person meditating upon the greatness of God and trying to arouse this feeling of joy and rejoicing and pleasure in God, this will cause an arousal below where maybe, he doesn't say for sure, but there is a possibility that maybe there will be a spirit from above, from the source of some tzaddik that will become impregnated into him, so to speak. So it's called abel. So it's actually called an ibul, that it actually is that the spirit of a tzaddik might actually become inseminated into him to be able to have him have this real service of joy for God. So it will become authentic. So that this will call the oath to actually be truly fulfilled, where he will become an actual tzaddik, where we're given this oath to become a tzaddik. So not that he'll become an actual tzaddik, but maybe he'll get like, a little bit of a true tzaddik to be brought into him. So again, he doesn't say that this is something that's definitely going to happen, but he says there is a possibility that it will happen. So to conclude, so what the basic lesson of today is this idea that while we don't know ultimately how we're going to end up, we don't know if we're going to end up as a tzaddik or not. And that's not something that we have control over. And not only that, the Alter Rebbe has already clearly said to us that it's most likely something that's not going to happen, because to become a real tzaddik is something that's a gift that's given just to very select few individuals. Nevertheless, we know that we were given an oath before we were born to be a tzaddik, which means, first of all, that we all have this obligation to try and to strive. And we talked about how the striving itself, there's benefit in that striving, because the striving itself is part of what the oath was about. And not only that, we talked about that the more a person strives and the more a person habituates themselves to act in a certain way and to think in certain ways, this actually can affect your actual behavior, and it can make it much easier for you. And we also talked about how you never know, and how it could be possible that through this work and through this striving, there is a possibility that maybe this arousal from below will cause an arousal from above of a spirit of another tzaddik to actually come and become impregnated into you in a small way, so that you could have this actual existence of being a tzaddik on some small level. And so again, just to relate it back to my handstand practice, and if any of you have a discipline of some sort, you might be able to relate to it as well. Will I ever get my press handstands? I don't know. I'd like to think so, and I hope so, but I actually don't know. But why do I show up for practice day after day after day after day? Because I really see the benefits that it gives to me. And not only that, the encouraging thing to me is that there have been other things, not press handstand, but other types of poses, which I felt similarly about. I remember just another little anecdote to share with you guys. There's another pose called scorpion. Those of you that are familiar with that, it's where you're on your forearms and your head's off the ground and you're in a back bend. So basically, so I remember that was a pose I really, really wanted to get it. And I specifically wanted to figure out how to do it from a headstand into scorpion. So I'd go into my headstand and I'd try to drop my feet and I'd come into my scorpion and I'd fall. And I'd do this day after day after day after day for weeks. And I'd fall every single time. And it was extremely frustrating. It was extremely annoying. And I was trying to, figure out ways to get it. And it was just becoming very frustrating. And one day I said, you know what? I just don't have the energy anymore. I'm going to let go. I'm not going to think about getting my scorpion anymore, that scorpion pose. What I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the steps to get there so that maybe someday, who knows when, who knows if ever, I'll get there, but at least I'll get stronger as a result and I'll build up the tools to be able to get to the scorpion pose. So I really started to focus on the steps as opposed to the end result. So I focused on pressing my forearms into the ground. Then I focused on just coming into a headstand, which is something I knew how to do. Then I said, okay, now I'm going to drop my feet and come into my back bend. Stayed in my back bend, really made sure I was there, really stable. Then from there, I slowly pushed into my hands, really slowly. And I said, okay, this is something I know how to do also. And then I slowly, next step, I lifted up my head. And lo and behold, that time when I had finally let go of the result, that's when I got my scorpion pose. So that's when, again, I realized this idea that when you let go of that result, paradoxically, that often is the tool that will get you to the result that you're looking for, because it's ultimately not about the goal in and of itself. It sounds kind of cliche. It's about the process and not the goal, but it's really true. It's that through the discipline, through the practice, through the daily work, that is what's precious to Hashem. That's what Hashem wants from us. And that's where he sees the work. And sometimes you can be surprised at the results that you might get or you might not have gotten, whether you expect them or not. So I hope this was helpful. I hope this was relatable. And we'll continue tomorrow with chapter 15. I'll speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.